Good morning. Let's see. Share screen. I'll share that in a morning or moment, not morning. And then go to Zoom, screen share. Yes, right? So I was in a discussion yesterday, kind of like a seminar, and we had an author join us. And I decided to go from my background of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the comic, to a bookstore. And everyone pointed out, like, oh, you're in a bookstore. And I was like, I can't actually be in a bookstore. So this is as close as I can get to that experience. I deeply miss being able to go into a bookstore and being able to look at the books. How are we doing today? Let's see. Just going through these. Chat. It's 10:56. Has anyone been able to go out into the wilds of society, seeing as we're all kind of locked indoors? I just learned this morning that we have about, in my area of Chino, we have 9 Starbucks total. And I go to one Starbucks closest to my house. And it gets busy on and off, a lot of commuters because it's near the freeway. But we just learned on the community page today that one of them, the Starbucks locations on near Chino Hills, closed down because one of the baristas apparently is carrying COVID-19, and so now they got to quarantine the whole store. And so if I had to open a White Claw at any time of the day, it would be this morning. I was just like, oh, really? Oh, I'm sorry to hear on the 2 jobs. Yeah. Right now it must be so tough. And then haven't gone out since the weekend. I try not to go out. Last night we did takeout. We ordered sushi and ramen from our local ramen place. That was really good. And we got to drive around. That's what we like to do. We like to drive around when it's cooler. We learned that another restaurant in our area shut down. And so they're closed for business. They just announced, like, thank you for being with us and supporting us, but we're closing this location. And so we kind of wanted to drive by and see, did they actually close, or are they just closing like within the next few days? But they're closed. And so that's that. I try to at least get out every so often to drive during the week. Good morning, everyone who's entering slowly but surely. Did anyone sleep in this morning like I did? I slept in until like 8:30 or 9. Let's see. Raise that a little bit. Yep. I was in a phone call this morning and somebody described what we're going through right now as pandemic fatigue or lockdown fatigue. And I'm like, that essentially describes the mood that we're currently in some way or form. We're just like losing our energy every single day. So it's 11 o'clock, but I'm going to give a few more minutes as folks try to make their way in. Give everyone a chance to log in. Hopefully everyone's internet is working today well enough. Yes, so if you would like to do to make an appointment, just email me or go ahead and put your name down in the Google Docs under faculty info. And that way we can make an appointment to discuss revisions or how we go about discussing the grades in any form or matter. But also maybe so we can discuss the current paper that we have due next Tuesday evening. So if you go to iLearn and you go to the top left, it's going to say faculty info. That's going to take you to just like general information page for me that I have set up for the beginning of the session. And there should be a link for office hours. You'll click that and just find an available time, whether today or Friday. And if any of those times don't work out for you, just contact me and then we'll see what we can schedule. Anyone watching anything fun on TV lately? We're almost done with season 2 of the Umbrella Academy. We still have to finish like 2 or 3 more episodes, but we're trying not to rush through them because that's what happened to us with The Mandalorian and The Witcher. We just binged it and then we're like, okay, what do we do now? What life do we live when there's nothing else out there for us currently at the moment? Ooh, finding horror or humanity in horror fiction. And then Castor is going to be a movie. Any good animes lately? I know I've watched some of Beastars. I'm not entirely a fan of Beastars because while I think they're taking on some of the similar ideas from Zootopia and Brand New Animal, the logic of consumption and that tied to sexuality, particularly within the high school setting, is just something I'm uncomfortable with. But I like Brand New Animal. I heard Inuyasha is coming back, and I saw the trailer for the new kind of series take on that. That looks good. Digimon has been going well, I hear, and then Pokemon is now starting a new YouTube series that's like slice of life. Yeah, Beastars is pretty good. I love the animation, especially the credits at the beginning with the stop animation. For me, though, I just when you get into logic of romance and sexuality and violence, and then you think about literal consumption of bodies in different ways, it just, for me, I'm not into that. So there's Beastars, Brand New BNA or Brand New Animal. That one's about a person who turns into a beast man or someone who's half human, half animal. And they go to live into an animal, a beastman society. And so it's a little slice of life of like, what is it like living with these powers, living kind of half human, half animal. I don't know the name of the new Inuyasha series that's coming out. Inuyasha being from like the 80s and 90s. And then if you go to the Pokemon, if you like Pokemon, they have a YouTube channel and they've just released like an episodic series where it's a slice of life and you see people living with their Pokemon, just an average daily life living in kind of the Pokemon world. I hear parts of it are emotional, like it goes into loss and grief and trauma and everything that happens in real world societies. Not to say it doesn't happen in Pokemon, but we see very little of it. And so I'm very interested in taking that on, but I'm not emotionally ready, because I remember like a long time ago, or not too long ago, there was a Pokemon movie came out where like a Luxray, which is like a lion, died to protect its owner from freezing out in the cold. And I'm like, no, no, Luxray, how could you? All right, everyone, it's 11:05. Let's go ahead and get started. Hello, it is Wednesday. I actually had to stand for a moment earlier this morning and be like, what day is it? Is it Tuesday? Is it Thursday? Um, we're climbing down from the start of the quarter, and we're moving into kind of the deeper trenches. Our second paper is due Tuesday night through Wednesday morning, probably before like noon, is really the due date that I'm kind of working with. So all of you guys who turned in your essays prior to or right around Sunday morning, if you didn't ask for an extension, you didn't get docked on any points. I try to be understanding of the situation that maybe people don't have internet doesn't work. So I'll give them until like Sunday 10 a.m. or Sunday afternoon to really get the essays in. The essay grades are released and online. And if you feel that for any reason that there's an error on my part, and as far as grading, or you want to discuss why your essay landed in one area versus another, feel free to email me, set up an appointment through Zoom so we can discuss the grade a little bit more. I am sadly held up to follow the UWP rubric. And so if you have any questions about your grade and as far as the comments, feel free to compare it to what the rubric states under course materials, and that should bring some clarity as well. But by all means, if you find there's an error, or you found that you want me to reread something because you think you actually scored higher than what I gave you, just let me know. I'm human, I make mistakes. We're all in this pandemic situation. And so maybe I graded in a different mindset, but let me know as soon as possible so I can take care of that. And as well, before we move and turn in the second paper. Has anyone started on the second essay? Has everyone found a short film? Is anyone still looking for short films? We all started our research, or do we have any questions? If you can't find a short film of your own, by all means, take one from the prompt. If you have Disney Plus, I really suggest the Disney Plus shorts that I included, one being Loop and the other one, I think it's Float, but I might be mistaken. It's been a while since I looked at which ones I put down. But don't feel you have to go scour for short films just to prove you can do the assignment. Feel free to take the ones that I provided for you and ask me questions if you if you struggle with where to go about your analysis. For today, we're going to talk a little bit more about academic resources. I'm trying to get the chat room open. There we go. We're going to talk about utilizing academic sources, research. We're not going to talk about where to find them, because JSTOR, the library database, and Google Scholar, I think, are really beneficial for finding academic sources. But we're going to talk a little bit about more about how to cite them within the text, because we really struggled with that, and how to introduce our sources as well. Why do we use certain sources more than others? Looking at your question in the chat, Julia, can we talk about the revision process again for this past essay? So I'll get to that in the moment with housekeeping, and just explain that a little bit more as well. Moving from academic sources, we're then going to move into looking at disability awareness film, or as I titled it, sensory, just based upon like what's the first impairment that we see within the video. We're going to look into that, discuss it, try to think, what does it make us think about? What does it make us do? How do we process disability or impairment in certain ways with this video before we then get into Cheyne's conclusion? And if you really like Cheyne's text, disability literature genre, I highly suggest you not only use or look at the conclusion, but look at the introduction. It should be available to you on JSTOR. And she goes much more in depth about her ideas within the introduction, let alone the chapters of the book. So by all means, if you have trouble finding it, let me know. But also the link on iLearn should take you not only to the conclusion, but also the book itself. So for housekeeping, for housekeeping, just to touch on the revision process a little bit more. So with revision, your goal is to go back, read the comments, read the final comments, look at the rubric and kind of see, okay, where did I land and why? On the essay itself, I try to leave a lot of comments between the editorial kind of lens, but also how would we develop this into a stronger paper? And so I go into the tone of voice, like if we had time to work on this further, where would we take it? And how would we develop our writing, not only for this project, but also for our next essay? What do we need to work on? And the final comments are hopefully to try to bring clarity to that. So look at the comments, look at the final comments, as well as the grade and where it lands on the rubric. And then when we meet to discuss revision, really what we're talking about is, what did you take away from the comments, from the rubric? Where did you feel you struggled with, and how could we revise and edit this? Revision is really about looking at this from a different perspective and fixing it, rewriting maybe a paragraph or two, strengthening and developing the thesis. And so I want to kind of see where you think you should take it, but also allow myself to give you feedback, compliments, but also here, maybe we should also work on this and think about this topic in this way. So that way you set yourself up for the best possible revision grade, if that makes sense. So not only like, okay, I know I need to fix this based on the comments, and you could revise it based on the comments, but that doesn't guarantee your essay will bump up to a higher grade. Whereas if you meet with me and discuss, there's more of an opportunity to do well, not only on the essay itself, but also on the next essay or the final essay with Jordan Peele's Us. And so if you, for whatever reason, can't meet with me, you can do a revision. However, you'll just want to do what you can to really understand the comments, unless you meet with me, let's say. Does that make sense, Julia? My chat's like, whoop. Yeah. And so I try to give you all a chance to discuss with me, why didn't I do so well? What can I do what can I change to do better? And a lot of the concerns this round involved developing analysis, citing sources correctly, but also structuring the body paragraph with the thesis statement. So we're not just writing out all our ideas and then like, okay, fix it up a little bit, we're done. Really, the goal of the essay is, let me think of a structure and work with a thesis to kind of connect them together. And then let me go in deeper and develop paragraphs with their own kind of structure. And so when you go into the revision process, you want to pull out and think, what did I hope to achieve with this paper? And was my structure set up to support that? Okay, that worked, but what about the body paragraphs and my analysis? Did I really develop my ideas fully, or did my structure allow me to develop my ideas? But with that said, does anyone have any other questions for housekeeping that maybe we can discuss before we move into the lecture today? So for revisions, they're actually due the day of the final exam. So you just email them to me. You don't have to send them on iLearn or SafeAssign. You just say, hey, this is my revision essay. It's essay 1. I earned this grade, and I'm hoping that hopefully I can get a higher grade. And then I'll read the essays, the revisions, as I'm grading the final exam and the final essay. The final exam is nothing really huge, and so that I should be going through really quickly. The final essay, that might take a little bit of time, but revisions, I generally look at them and think, okay, reading this essay, because I'm not leaving comments behind to submit back to you. I look, okay, this would land on the rubric in in, let's say, a B plus. The B, yes, the zone of the B, plus, minus, that depends on certain errors like citation, organization, grammar, things like that. Then I look at the past essay and I think, oh, well, this paper earned a C minus, but this is a B plus. So I'm going to raise it up to a B or a B plus based upon the work that has been done over the revision process. So don't even worry about submitting on iLearn. Just by the final exam, submit me your revision, and I'll be able to look how it's similar or different from your first submitted essay. Does that answer the question further? Or the next question, rather? Of course. I do revisions because the process of revising is going to help you develop your essay, other like actual assignments along the way. And during a 10-week quarter, I give so much room for like, maybe you can take on and revise the second essay, but because of the 5 weeks, really, even revising one essay is a lot, considering we have 3 essays and a final exam, and there's not much we can change about that. Let me check that link in a moment after this. But did anyone else find they couldn't read the article on iLearn? Or did they have to search it down themselves? I'll unlock my phone because I gotta do this VPN do a push thing. And it gets really bothersome. Send me a push. Did anyone get a chance not to read the article? Cheyne, conclusion. Oh, come on. Reading and feeling disability literature and genre. I don't have the chat open right now, but I'll open it up in a moment. It's doing this weird thing where, nope, go back. Chat. Where'd my chat go? Okay, sorry about that. So hopefully, if you didn't take time, if you didn't have time to search for the reading, I just posted it in the chat room right now. Sorry about that. That was my bad. But hopefully, if you find yourself interested in this reading, you could go look into this reading further. I'll readjust and I'll lecture this as though I'm explaining the reading and how it could be useful to you. Thank you for bringing that up to me. Just so much going on in regular life, school life, work life. And so I'll try to do better with that next class. Tomorrow we're doing a workshop and I'll be bringing in a sample paragraph from one of your colleagues, one of your peers, and we'll look at it together as a class and think, what are the strengths to this and what are some weaknesses and how would we develop this to a stronger product? And so next week, when we do the reading on Monday, where we start reading about monsters and how is the monster this amalgamation of different prejudices, the link should be there and available to you. We're slowly going to be transitioning into Jordan Peele's Us. And so starting next week, all our readings are going to be geared around the film, since we're all going to be focusing on the film as a class. The link here is in the chat. So, oh, sorry, Bobbin. I sent it. It did that thing again where it sent it privately. There we go. Everyone. So Bobbin got it first, but now the class got it first. Okay. Sorry about that. Moving forward now, since I brought an academic source, let's talk a little bit about academic sources as I kind of wipe my brow like, oh, what a morning. So a lot of us utilize academic sources within our papers, though there were several papers within the first assignment that stayed more toward the product that was being advertised. So Apple, Microsoft, the Xbox controller, shush phone, put it on airplane mode, save my Wi-Fi. A lot of us stayed towards information that came directly from websites attributed to the commercials we were watching, which isn't bad. But when it comes to like those 3 sources that are required on the prompt, we really want to use those sources for academic arguments and research that goes deeper into the ideas that we're working with. Because if we stay towards what the commercial is showing without thinking deeper about it, then we're only reaching a certain level of the assignment, and that's going to land particularly closer to a C or B minus range on the rubric, sorry. And so when we use academic sources, we're looking at theoretical perspectives. We're looking at how scholars have thought about these issues prior to us and really ways in which we can develop from their arguments. But we're also thinking about how our essays need to be supported as scholarly works. We need to have logos and ethos, kind of that backing of ethics and logic. And academic sources really allow for us to develop our argumentative strength, in the sense, like, if I'm going to be discussing disability studies, I need to find sources that have discussed it before and prior to me, which shows not only am I considerate of the ethics behind the work that I'm doing, remember political justice and bringing attention to a community or social space that's not discussed well often enough, but also the logic. I'm making sure that everything connects and flows, and I have people to back me up along the way. If I'm discussing how, let's say, Microsoft turns the disabled body into a piece of technology and problematizes what we think about when it comes to the normal, ideal human body, quote unquote, I really need scholars who have done the work before me to support me, so that way it doesn't look like I'm trying to attack the disabled community or those with disabilities. I'm not trying to attack Microsoft or Apple themselves, but rather I'm trying to open up a discussion to see how culture has often thought about disability, for instance, let's say. Not only that, but it allows for us to say so much more. When we use an academic source, let's say the GLQ journal issue here, when I use them, I allow myself kind of playroom to think through and analyze ideas. And if I stay towards information from, let's say, Microsoft and Apple, that doesn't give me a lot to say or to think about. And so I really, not only do I limit my conversation and discussion, but I start getting stuck. Like, what do I write? I have no idea where to go from here. Well, an academic source would allow us to connect ideas and to kind of go back and forth between a scholar and then the commercial and really make the paper easier in a different way. Well, as shown, a lot of times we find these sources on JSTOR, on Academic Search Premier. Google Scholar, sorry, is a very strong source in the sense that JSTOR is focused on literature and the analysis of literature within the humanities. Academic Search Premier is a little bit broader in scope and can go to scientific papers, psychology papers, political science arguments. And then Google Scholar is even broader than that, where it's going to take you sometimes often to the same sources, but it's going to look on the internet like widely to maybe even databases that we don't have access to through University of California, Riverside, or the UC system. And so try and utilize these databases to help find you the strongest sources available to you. As well, the library is great. The library databases are great. If you find you want to take a medical approach to disability in some way or form, there are medical and medicinal, but medical geared or centric databases there and available to you. However, we're more so focused on cultural ideas. So maybe a medical source could start off your paper and talk about eugenics, or talk about how the body has often been thought of in science, the disabled body, as something non-normative or something to fix. And those sources really can be helpful for hooks, for counter arguments, for early essay introductions into topics. Does that make sense? Are we on the same page here and as far as academic sources? Just moving my chat around. Someone give me, we're all good. Just when you're ready. I assume we're all taking notes or listening. Okay. I just want to make sure my voice is going through and that people can hear me. When we're looking for academic sources, we want to look for journal articles. So I'll show you examples in a moment. We want to use book chapters. So Cheyne's arguments, but then you have Robert McGurr, you have Mitchell and Snyder. You have any chapter of an academic book could be useful to you if used appropriately. And so when it comes to academic sources, you're not limited to just journal articles. Those are peer reviewed, yes, but also these academic books and texts are peer reviewed, maybe even deeper, because I was, like I said, in a discussion yesterday with an author, and she said her academic book on becoming human and what it means to be human in an anti-Black world took her 13 to 14 years to write, mainly due to peer review and editorial processes. But you also have academic book reviews. Those can be useful if you want to look deeper into an author's particular topic of, let's say, a book, and data and studies, let's say research on the sciences and how the sciences approach disability and impairments. Those could be useful for you in particular directions. We don't want to use only data, and we don't only want to use cultural representation articles, let's say looking into cultural analysis. It's good to have, rather than a yes and no, a yes and kind of extend the conversation, if that makes sense. And so sometimes I'll bring in data. How many people believe disability is tied to the body? How many, how often are disabilities talked about in this particular social space versus others? Or what is the representative number of those with disabilities who get assistance versus others within, let's say, Chicago or Los Angeles or New York? And so try to vary your sources, but make sure they tie into your argument or allow you to develop your argument further. And as I posed down here at the bottom of the PowerPoint slide, can we use non-academic sources? You can, but you want to make sure that they're there to give you a general understanding or give your reader a general understanding. So it's okay to go to a blog post or an IGN article to discuss disability within video games and accessibility, or it's okay to go to Teen Vogue, for instance, and look at how teenagers think about impairment and having disabilities at this time in age with coronavirus. But we also want to use academic sources to look deeper, to give us something to say that's much more critical than what we could have taken on prior. So I'm going to go to the next slide because it's just a continuation here. And so on the right is an example of a journal article from GLQ. This one is on sexual pleasure as a problem for HIV biomedical prevention. You can read a little bit if you want while the slide is up. But when we cite academic sources, oftentimes we're going to see this. We may not see the name of the university. Sometimes we may. We may not see the publishing date or the issue and number date. If you look on the bottom or the bottom left of the page, there's GLQ. That's the name or title of the journal. 22 is the volume number. And then 1 right here would be the issue number. You have the DOI, and then you have the date 2015, and then Duke University Press. So all that information is there for you, but sometimes it might not be. However, when we're citing a source, I feel a sneeze coming on. Allergies today. When we cite a source in text, what we want to give are kind of the main pieces of the text. So I'm talking about the title, the author. Within the text itself, like in the sentence, we don't have to give the full title. We only have to give like the first few words of the title. That makes sense. So here I'd say, in Kane Race's article, Reluctant Objects, published in GLQ, Race argues, and then the quotation. And so on the PowerPoint slide, we want to introduce the scholars, their names, their full names first, and the title of the work, especially when we first introduce their source. A lot of times in this paper that we just turned in and received, students would just turn in the paper and it would just have a title or name in a parenthetical citation, and a page number with the quotation. And if you just list that and nothing else, you just list the quotation and then the parenthetical, that's actually a dropped quotation and improper citation. What you want to do is give a signal phrase, as I show here. In her work on affect and genre, scholar and theorist Rita Cheyne describes how quotation, and then at the end, I list the title of the book and the page number. Let me blow my nose. The parenthetical, it comes at the end of the sentence before the period. And so even if you might quote a scholar or someone early in the sentence, you want to move that all the way, the parenthetical, to the end of the sentence, not up against the comma if there is a comma. As well, you want to make sure you introduce every time you cite a source, who is the source from, just to make it clear. As well, it kind of helps make analysis or analyzing the quotation easier, because you're kind of directing us into the quotation on what to think about it and what is the quotation about. So if you italicize a quotation, you put emphasis added either in the parenthetical, or sometimes authors have done emphasis added in a footnote. For me, either one is okay. However, it's oftentimes done in the parenthetical citation. So it look like this. I'm going to type it in the chat. So blah, 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 I like dogs. So quotation, emphasis added, and then I'm trying to think. Sometimes there's a comma before the page number, other times there are not. It really depends on the source and their formatting. But you could do emphasis added, comma 35. Here I didn't do that. Each formatting style is different. And I often don't do emphasis added because I'd rather not think about it. That's why I'm kind of like, oh, each one's different. If you choose to do it, however, just kind of go about it the best way possible. Look on Purdue OWL and search emphasis added MLA. And if I ever critique it, oftentimes it's just making sure it's in the right place, or we're trying not to repeat emphasis added. We don't want to change our source quotations too much or too often. We want to let it kind of speak for itself, and then we analyze and kind of go into it in detail, if that helps. Does that answer the question? Okay, good. Thank you for asking that question. That's a deeper level of quotation that not a lot of people get into in 1C. But if you choose to add an emphasis, like an italicize or bold a word within the quotation, you would add emphasis added, page number, and then the quotation. Try not to do it too much, but it is something that academics do as a practice if there's no other way to draw emphasis to an idea. Now, with page numbers are not always going to be included. Like I read a lot of books on Kindle on my phone whether I'm in bed, like at 2 a.m. and I'm trying to go to sleep and I'm on Twitter, or whether I'm on my Chromebook and I have the Kindle app open, or PDFs. Sometimes PDFs and website pages don't have page numbers. That's okay. Just list the title, list the author by last name if you've already kind of told us what the work you're focusing on is. However, if you are citing two different sources in the same sentence, one, please see me because that could get pretty tricky. But two, in the parenthetical citation, as shown here, you would list the citation for the first source, semicolon, and then the second source or the later source you cite in that sentence afterward. And so down here, Derrida, page 37, semicolon, Foucault, 54 through 55. That's if you're citing a quotation that goes from one page to the next, and then just end citation. Do we have any questions on using academic sources or citing them? Any questions on maybe comments that I wrote inside essays that anyone wants to bring up for the class? And so I can like discuss that a little bit. Water, water, water. Water. Yes, very good. So what I think you're asking, pardon me, and I'm just explaining to the group is, say for instance, you are focusing on the chapter in the in-text citation. So in her chapter titled Thinking Loosely, Donna J. Haraway argues that. Also, another thing, if you lead into a quotation like states or affirms, you would use a comma, then the quotation. However, instead of the quotation, if you use the word that, you don't need a comma. So you'll see an example here. So let's see, staying with the trouble, 34. So that should be to everyone. So here's an example of a sentence that has a signal phrase and is properly cited. And her chapter titled Thinking Loosely, comma, Donna J. Haraway, that's the author, argues that, and we go straight into the quotation, no comma necessary. That adjective kind of works as a comma itself. Then the parenthetical citation, because we've already given the author and the title, we give in italics or italics the title of the book, then page number. Oh, so Thinking Loosely is the chapter title. That is in quotation marks. Chapter titles would be in quotation marks, but titles of books, of albums, of journal issues themselves, like GLQ, that's a journal, those would be in italics or italicized. So whatever you do, if you have a book chapter, you want to make sure you introduce it and italicize it and put it in your signal phrase the first time you mention it. If you have an author you're just introducing, introduce them by full name in the signal phrase. But afterwards, as long as you do a signal phrase to let us know who wrote this quotation, where is this quotation from, you could just use the author's last name and then put the title in the parentheticals, or focus on the parenthetical, or the focus on the chapter title and then put the author's name in the parenthetical. Does that make sense? I know I stumbled there a little bit. Go ahead. One more question. Just checking time. Okay. And definitely, if you need help again with citation and signal phrases, always feel free to look back at the sample papers and paragraphs, at the comments I've left you, the PowerPoint slides, including this one, as well. Look to Purdue OWL. That's a really great resource that, again, a lot of scholars, even professors, use often every day when they're researching. So the question, the book title should always be in the parenthetical citation. We can't put the chapter title at all. You can use the chapter title, but it really depends on what you're focusing on. So say, for instance, if you've already mentioned the book and introduced it, and that you're focusing on the title of the chapter, or you're focusing on the chapter, you can put the chapter title in the parenthetical, but you want to introduce the author or use the author or scholar's name in the sentence, in the signal phrase. Also, with this citation, we don't want to use a comma. Very rarely do we use a comma in parenthetical citations. The only case that we would do that is if we used emphasis added, or if there's a special occasion. But very minimally would we use a comma in a parenthetical citation. It's generally the first piece of information and then the page number. Rarely a paragraph number. I've never done that in my time as an undergrad and a graduate student. But You are allowed to use the chapter title in the parenthetical citation, but be sure you give some piece of information, whether the book title or the author name within the signal phrase, and kind of reverse that as well. If you're using the chapter title and the signal phrase in the sentence, use the author name in the parenthetical citation. Yeah, it gets a little confusing, but as long as you give some piece of information to tell us in the signal phrase what you're looking at or where this came from, then the parenthetical citation is giving the name of the book or the author or whatever you didn't give, to kind of signal us who wrote this or where is this from. Nope, no, it's all right. I don't want to like be confusing anyone more than that is necessary. Do we have any other questions? Let me just check what the next slide is. Yeah, I might as well open that. This could be on academic sources, why we use them, what are good sources to use for this paper, what are sources we might want to look for when it comes to analyzing short film. You also tend to know that a source is academic if they have these really long and kind of obtrusive titles. So like on the left, science fiction studies, the manuscripts and books of Philip K. Dick, or Darko Suman's P.K. Dick's opus, Artifice and Refuge and Worldview, Introductory Reflections. They're generally very long, where they give kind of like a snappy title and then an informative subtitle. So like dogs, why we think animals are just as good as us. I don't know. Okay. So with academic sources discussed, what we're going to do is we're going to move into a discussion of the short film, just loosely talk about it. What did it make us feel like? What did it make us think about? How are the images shown to us? Because of the length of it and just the time of the class, we don't have time necessarily to watch it again. I do pose that those of you who haven't seen the short film, please go back and watch it in connection with the chapter that I'll be discussing with you. But after we discuss the video, I'll show you how we can include an academic source to discuss some of the ideas that we bring about. And so the film we watch, it's listed on YouTube as disability awareness film, and it has a little bit more to the title. It's on YouTube, and the uploader name I didn't include on the slide here. But what did we think about it? Did we like it? Why did we like it? Did it make us uncomfortable? Did it discomfort us in some way or form? Did it make us think about anything we've read so far or make us think about disability in a different way? Feel free to jump in, use the chat. But what were our thoughts about it in general? Like, as a viewer who watches TV, YouTube videos, films, what were your thoughts as you watched it? So, so one point is, I think it was nice because it showed many different types of disabilities. Good, yep, including cognitive disabilities. Yes, so one of the struggles with disability studies is that oftentimes, because when you look at the history, cognitive disabilities have only really been discussed within a certain length of time compared to like missing limbs, hunchbacks, deformities as they're known within the medieval period and the Renaissance. And so there's still a struggle in disability studies today to understand how cognitive or non-visible disabilities are represented, or how we should think about them in connection with or against more visible disabilities or impairments. What else? What else? Looking at the chat here. Did anyone feel put on the spot by the commercial? Whether it was you felt like you were being directly addressed or you were being watched or looked at? Did anyone feel maybe discomforted by that? Or maybe did anyone feel this was like really, really foundational to a way to think about disability? And then I'd kind of add to that last question, how would we add this to like our understanding of disability? Okay. When the girl on screen address, I'm just like you. Anyone else? Okay. So some things about the film that I want to pull out is the way in which the film makes us reflect upon or think about our understandings of disability. So in some way this is a commercial, but in other ways it's a short film in the sense that the length of time kind of presses outside of the commercial restraints or the kind of like televisual format. And as we're looking at different disabilities or impairments, whether cognitive or physical in some way or form, the because of the way that the individuals, the actors, the performers, the those with disabilities converse with us, we don't get a chance to like question them or press against them. Rather, we're told to listen in a way that's not telling us. We're put very much on the spot, and because of that, like the imagery of being stared at or looked at, it's forcing us to kind of reflect upon what it is that we often do to those with disabilities or impairments. Does anyone kind of feel in a similar light with that reading? Check time. So to add to what Parmi was saying, that that statement of "I'm just like you" is not just a generalized statement, but it's a political statement because it's giving voice to those who are often ignored, often thought little about. And so "I'm just like you" is not only a question of what it means to be like somebody else, but also a question or a thought process on what does it mean to be a person and how do we exclude or include people within this kind of framework of the individual or the subject. And then to Nancy, it was good because it makes people get a better understanding the effect these disabilities can have on people. It points out how we do not take into consideration their disability. Yeah, very much so as well. You see the spectrum of disability and how disability or impairment comes in various forms, not necessarily physical forms, but forms in which culture doesn't represent. Oftentimes when we see someone who has a disability, it's about saving them, it's about protecting them, or it's about seeing them as the other or the disfigured or the monstrous or the weird person, kind of outlining the rest of the social group. And yet here in this commercial, I'm particularly thinking about the young girl who has cerebral palsy towards the end of the video, where she tells us with her automated voice that she doesn't want to be babied. She doesn't want to be looked down upon and doesn't need to be treated like that. And there's that moment where who I believe is her sibling tells the older woman, she could speak to you, she can understand and hear you. You don't have to talk to her like that. And so there's a charge to this video where because they those with disabilities have been understood as less than or understood as differently or different from us, the political charge of talking at us rather than with us becomes this moment of reflection, not only about disability, but also ourselves and the superiority we place above those who have disabilities or impairments. Does that make sense? That's kind of working off your statement, Nancy, or your pose into the discussion here. Don't feel you have to respond to it, but it's also there on the table as well. Did we see any signs or any objects with political meaning throughout the video? So of course we saw the wheelchair, but what else did we see? So looking at the young girl on the screen, is she wearing anything that culturally we have an understanding of, whether good, bad, or indifferent? Yes, so hearing aids, that's one. What else? School uniform, we have an understanding of the school uniform. Um, I actually didn't look into that, but that would be interesting to think about how school and institutions and knowledge play into how we understand disability and how this commercial maybe presses against that. That would be an interesting direction that you could take up in an essay. Is there anything else? What about the first gentleman who was in the video on discussing sensory impairments? Very good. I don't know if we necessarily want to focus on the color, though you could focus on the color and this idea of how whiteness plays into disability. But the cane as an item, as an object, operates as a sign of blindness, of limitations, of kind of feeling around a world that is not made with those with visual impairments or sensory impairments in mind. So great. Now I want to ask, yes, there was also something there about physical health with size as well. We want to also bring into how while it wasn't a focus in that section on sensory disabilities or impairments, weight loss, fatness, and obesity do get drawn into discussions of disability, but also get forgotten and ignored. And so when you talk about ways in which culture and society disables one or disables a population of the culture, weight definitely plays a part, let alone who has access to health when it comes to weight loss and obesity. So lower class, upper middle class, communities that have mainly access to fast food versus healthy organic food. What does organic mean, and how's organic and yeah, basically organic food. How is the adjective of organic a modifier for upper middle white class? And so now I want to pose a question here. Is there a way in which we can argue that disability itself, not necessarily the objects used to help one with an impairment, but disability, whether it's the autistic individual or the individual with autism or the individual with a sensory impairment, do those operate as reflective signs or signs of, like when we get to semiotics, do those operate as icons and signs for us to think about? So say, for instance, if I'm watching the Umbrella Academy season 2, and there's an individual who has autism, does he quantify or qualify as a semiotic sign or icon himself? Potentially. Okay. Anyone else? So not only do we see the cane or the wheelchair, but or like when we talk about the girl with all the gifts, we see the orange uniform and this institutional setting. But could we argue that persons within a certain space and with certain items or identities that they reflect a semiotic system or idea within culture and media? Exactly. Good, Dee. It really also depends on the context of the narrative of the thing you're watching. And so if I watch, let's say, for instance, Shawshank Redemption or any other prison movie, or maybe even institutional movie, not only do I see the signs of the white clothing or the striped uniform of the prison outfit, but I see representations of prisoners, of cellmates, of violent racialized persons and identities that become a sign and hold a meaning that I can then, within culture and society, place on other people. And similarly, though, as well with disability, oftentimes when we look at media, we think about, yes, a wheelchair, a cane, um, a straitjacket as objects that carry meaning, but representations of people can carry meaning themselves based upon the context of the narrative they're in, the space that they're in, that the identity they seem to be upholding. And so watching the Umbrella Academy season 2, there's a young boy who has autism, and the acting is really well done. And I had to look up, does this boy have autism or not? Did they hire a young boy who is actually he's actually autistic? And he's not. He's actually one of the voice actors on Paw Patrol. And yet his acting was so believable to me that I started to question, what does it mean then to take on autism as an identity to perform? And I argue that this boy would not have been able to perform the idea of autism without looking at someone who has autism and replicating that. And so within culture, there's already an idea of what the person with autism looks, thinks, or acts like, which is both problematic, but can work also in political ways. Do we have any questions about that or thoughts on that? I don't want to move into the academic texts until we feel comfortable kind of where we're looking at the film itself. And so think about as well when we play Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, or we watch things like The OC, or Friday Night Lights, we have this imagery of what the gangbanger looks like, or what he thinks like or acts like. And so when we look in society, when we're driving down the street, we start to identify people by these cultural images that are actually culturally propagated and created and sustained. Somebody, because he looks a certain way or is a certain race, is not a gangbanger, but that's what culture tells us to think about when we look at certain people or races or cultural sociocultural economic classes. Yeah, and we think about, even then, when we think about questions of diversity and inclusion, we don't want somebody who's African American to keep playing a gang member, because that racializes gang members and depicts African Americans as always already gang members. We want in narratives where somebody can be a different person. So let's say, for instance, somebody with a disability could be a sheriff, somebody with a vision impairment could be a professor, or somebody who is African American could be the president. We want to see these cultural ideas depicted in different ways. So that way, when we look at our friends, our family members, or our political or institutional members of society doing something, we don't label them a certain way or form. And this, again, ties deeply into semiotics, because culture not only looks at objects as signs or icons that carry meaning, but the way that people perform certain ideas, they themselves then carry meaning. Yes. So like cis actors, cis heteronormative actors who don't identify as transgender, playing trans characters are trying to create, but also base their performances off the idea of what it means to be trans. And so if I watch um, one of um, one of the good shows that came out was on AMC where they had a trans woman play a trans woman. Not only that, they didn't introduce her as a trans woman throughout the show within the narration. It came up once and then that was it. And really, we started to think about all the complexity of what it means to be trans and how this is only one person's experience of being trans versus this cultural idea of like all transgender people, men, women, or non-binary individuals look, act, and think like this. Same thing with homosexuality, with being a lesbian. A lot of people cling to the idea of the butch female as what a lesbian is, but that's not the case. And oftentimes that's based in sexism and misogyny. And so we want to start thinking about when it comes to semiotics, not only are objects something that carry meaning, but people themselves and the context they're in can also carry a certain understanding of race, of gender, of sexuality, of gender identity, of socioeconomic identity and class. Do we have any questions before we move on? This is why it's imperative when we watch, let's say, Fox News or we watch CNN and we see media playing before us of the protests, of the revolutions, and they're codified as white or riots, sorry, not white. It's oftentimes white media mediators or journalists who show these imagery or images. When we see the riots, you want to think about what of the riots or the protests are they showing me, and because of this focus, let's say on violence or on looting, this is why it's called a riot versus the protests, which a majority are sit-ins, are open discussions on megaphones, are singing, are chanting, are dancing. Those are the protests, and yet because the cameras focus in on the violence, on the looting, on the police resistance against the protesters, even resistance there, we have to think about what is resistance and who can take that up. How is media creating these images and perforating an idea of what it means to riot and loot and to protest? Why is it that whiteness is connected to protesting, but blackness is connected to rioting and violence and looting and police violence, definitely, and how certain individuals within society need to be incriminated or pulled into the jail or prison system, which is a development logic of slavery and capitalizing bodies. So I'm going to move forward now. I know I kind of dropped a bomb there with news and media. You can definitely do the same thing with cartoons. You could do the same thing with sitcoms. Think about what sitcoms you watch and what ideas of like the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. What does the upper middle class family or upper class family look like when they're African American? And how is this good, bad, and different? How do we need to critically understand what is being displayed to us? But now let's look at the academic reading. So I want to discuss this for those of you, whether you read it or not, as a source that we could use maybe to analyze the video we watched for today's class. So when it comes to representations of disability, oftentimes we think about, oh, this is really emotional, this is really captivating or inspirational, but we don't think about the complexity of what it means to have a disability or to be impaired. And not all the time are moments inspirational, heartwarming, sad, or emotional. They could be exciting, they could be liberating, they can be thought-provoking in a different way or form. What does it mean maybe that on the news, we don't talk about the person with a disability who is at the protests and is speaking their voice, and how racism, disableism all connect in white supremacy and the logic of who is the human subject and who is not. Well, with Cheyne, what Cheyne is looking at is how genre fiction and literature, so like horror, sci-fi, romance, drama, science fiction, how they represent disability in problematic, troubling, but also very useful and political ways. And so we want to think about affect. And affect, as shown here on the screen, affect is that which we feel when we're emotionally provoked, whether we're made angry, we're discomforted, we're made sad, we're made afraid. Affect is that kind of feeling we feel or the emotion we feel. Whenever I go into a building, let's say Target, and there are tons of people right now, and everyone's either wearing masks or people are taking their mask off in the store to have a drink or to talk when they really don't need to take the mask off. The affect that space gives me is one of anxiety or one of stress, because for me, I have multiple mental disabilities as far as like I'm on the spectrum, I have anxiety, I have ADHD, I have OCD, I have PTSD. And so for me, I am affected by a space much more differently than somebody else might, whether or not they have a disability or impairment. Similarly, though, what Cheyne is arguing is that genre fiction, including genre media, so like science fiction, horror, as we'll get to, drama, romance, comedy, they have a way of resisting what society is often propagated. So the image of the person with blindness as inspiring or captivating or emotional. They have a way of going against this reading and saying, no, disability is much more complex than that. And so what genre hopes to achieve, as I read here with the slide, they use discomfort and disability to create more than what we think about. And this gets into reflexive representations. So she defines reflexive representations as a way to encourage the reader or the viewer, in our case, to think or feel disability anew in challenging, destabilizing, or denaturalizing ways. And so no longer can we think about disability as only heartwarming or emotional or sad or uplifting or inspirational, but we can think about them in ways in which disability is not tied to these cultural stigmas or ideologies or mythologies, but instead they prove that disability is the signifier that limits how we understand an individual. As the young girl says, I am just like you. What does that mean? And how is that a political statement to challenge what it means to be disabled, but also what we think about when we think about disability? Are we okay so far? Does that make sense? Is anyone lost? By all means, don't feel you can't ask what's called a dumb or stupid question. There's no stupid, dumb question. That's all based on logic of who has able-mindedness, who has the able mind and who has the disabled mind. Whatever question comes to you, if you have one, feel free to ask. So what we want to do is we want to be alert to what the text is doing in its specific context. What is it trying to show us? What is it thinking about? How is disability represented here in a particular way? And through that, we can build up a critical reflection of understanding disability. And so like the Microsoft commercial on Xbox and this adaptive controller, how is disability portrayed as an idea of limitation, of inability, of failure to perform a certain way or to play a game a certain way? And how is it then building the idea that we need to technologically save those who are disabled or have a disability, as it is known in culture, disabled? And yet we also want to think about complexity and how the work may be based off a simplistic reading of disability or a complex reading of disability. Same thing with being trans or being queer or being Black. How is the work either performing in some way or form to discomfort us on what we recognize as the Black experience or the queer experience? And what does it mean, the queer experience, as something that could be lumped up as a simple idea? And so now gets the question before we go, how do we think we can use this source? So thinking about what we watched and all the disabilities or impairments we learned about, and the individuals who hold an impairment, how can we use the source in let's say in a paragraph or an essay? Do we think that the short film provides a viewing that is much more complex than we would like? Do we think it discomforts us for good reason? It's trying to make us think about things much more critically. Does it make us reflect upon the ableism we hold when we watch representations of those with impairments or disabilities? Or another question, can we argue that the short film presents a complex depiction of what it means to have a disability or impairment? And in that way, it works to disrupt how disability is often thought of. I'll write that question down. So does the short film utilize complexity to disrupt how disrupt how culture thinks about those with impairments or disabilities? So we are out of time. If we don't want to discuss, I don't want to hold you up too much longer. So I'm going to give you the homework for tomorrow, just so that way we can move forward. So the PowerPoint slide has ideas of how we can utilize the source. This is taken from the introduction of Cheyne's work, and so feel free to look over that and to ask me questions if you have any afterwards. But also for tomorrow, we're doing a workshop to get ready for the submission of the second essay. So bring your notes, bring your questions, concerns as we prepare for the essay and kind of work out an idea of how to structure it, how to analyze our short films. But also we'll be looking at selections from a sample essay, both a body paragraph as well as an introduction. And so do come ready to discuss the sample, and I will upload it today for you to look at before class. So that way we can set ourselves up for success the best way possible. We might have time for a short film analysis. And so if you have any short films you might want to think about that aren't listed on the prompt for the assignment, feel free to send me a suggestion. Or if you have any, let's say if you want to look at a short film on autism, on vision impairments or obesity, feel free to bring those up and I could start looking and seeing what I can find, all right? So that's it for today's lecture. The office hour link is listed on iLearn under faculty info. Just go to iLearn Blackboard, and the top left section, faculty info, will have the link for office hours. As well, if you are having trouble finding the short films from the prompt, 2 films are on Disney Plus if you have access to those. If you don't, you should be able to find like a short and abbreviated version on YouTube that you can maybe use to think about it. But I would highly suggest also look at the videos on the prompt that are on YouTube themselves. Half of them, if not a majority of them, are available to you on YouTube. But I did want to give those who have Disney Plus a chance to work with those films if they had those as an option. And then let's see, yeah. So take care, everyone. Stay safe, stay healthy. I will be available for office hours today. And so feel free to schedule yourself if there's an appointment open, or if you can't meet within the selected appointment, please let me know through email. We can maybe schedule something within the next couple of days. Oh, all of the films on the prompt aren't on YouTube. Let me go ahead and look and see what I can find, and I'll list the short films on iLearn, so that way you guys can find them if you have access to them, and if not, I could go about seeing where they're at on YouTube. All right, so take care, everyone. Stay safe, and if you have any questions, please let me know. If you have any questions about the last essay in your grade as well, feel free to contact me, and I'll discuss that with you openly and assuredly. Take care. Bye, everyone.